So technical difficulties aside, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much, everyone, for making the time. Project that or something that I am passionate about is education in general. I used to be a biology teacher. I'm contractually obligated to mention this fact once per presentation that I do. And in this case, I'm going to be helping everybody with dossiers. So why do you actually craft a teaching dossier? Probably the big question that people would be having. The reason being is it shows the teaching that you have been doing. It shows it in a format that you can use for a variety of different things, like, for example, seeking promotion, seeking renewal, all these kinds of things. But before I start talking to you about dossiers and that, I'll do my disclosures. So I do have a couple of disclosures to make. All of them are kind of not-for-profit for the most part. So I am paid faculty at Queen's University, so I'm obligated to say nice things about Queen's. I am a member of the Royal College's Accreditation Committee. I'm a member of the CFPC Standards Working Group, and I'm a member of the National Accreditation Conference's Scientific Planning Committee, as well as I've been successful in obtaining some funding from Pfizer for a couple of unstructured educational grant projects in aplastic anemia, multiple myeloma, and gene therapy. This presentation is directly funded and accomplished because Queen's University retained my and others' employment. So what actually is a teaching dossier? So other than being another thing that you have to work on, other than your CV, which is kind of apparently annoying enough to be working on at any given time, in this case, a teaching dossier is kind of like the story of your educational life. So as Selden said in 1997, it's a factual description of your major strengths and teaching achievements. It's describing documents and materials that suggest the scope and the quality of your teaching performance. So I've taken this and I've paraphrased it down with the 2 bullet points at the bottom. So it should contain and curate the kinds of teaching that you do. It should also be organized to demonstrate how you fulfill your teaching philosophy with your actions as an educator. Jen, do I need both, or can I just use the lapel mic?
You can just use the lapel.
Fantastic. Well, that's awkward.
Yes, it is.
This is better, right? People are able to hear me still? Fantastic. So anyone who reads your dossier should know who you are as an educator, what you have done, what you are currently doing, and kind of make a good guess of what you would do in a given situation. So it's meant to be a professional document that provides evidence of your teaching beliefs, experiences, and abilities. Now, I'm going to stop speaking in the abstract, and I'm going to move over to the things that should actually be in there. But all of this are excerpts from the Queen's dossier guide for folks to be able to see. So if you type in Queen's CTL dossier guide into Google, you will find the resources that are there, both in the Faculty of Health Sciences and the CTL. Now, I know I'm supposed to be justifying my existence and saying that, oh, the Office of Professional Development and Educational Scholarship is vastly different resources than the Center for Teaching and Learning. Truthfully, on this one, I am merely a health sciences face on what is good practice in general. The Center for Teaching and Learning's documents are wonderful, and they're the kind of thing that you could be referring to. So why should you take the time to actually building one of them? So professionally, they are required for faculty appointment and promotion. So if you are seeking to become an associate or a full professor, a strong dossier is required. You also will be needing them more often than not if you're seeking for any kinds of awards nomination for your teaching, as well as scholarships or grants, or if you are seeking to become academic faculty. This is the kind of thing that an academic-oriented hospital would be looking at. Do you have a dossier that shows that you would be an above-average educator? How do you prove that? It's going to have to go into the documents that you're providing. So things that demonstrate the quality and quantity of your teaching and your professional development. People forget about that. It's not just your teaching. It's also your professional development that matters here. For you personally, it would assist in your preparation for interviews because, number one, if you want a confidence booster right before you go into an interview, update your CV. You're like, yeah, I did all of that. Every time I go and I do that with my conference presentations, it's a real shot in the arm. It also provides an opportunity to reflect on the teaching that you've been doing. What kinds of teaching are you doing? Every now and then I go and I look over my teaching dossier and I say, I am not really doing a whole lot of in-person teaching anymore. So I seek out opportunities for doing in-person teaching. It would also help you to focus on your future goals. So now that I've seen, hey, I'm not doing nearly as much teaching, in person, this might be something that I might seek out in additional detail. It also helps you organize your experience, and it serves as a good collection of all the teaching that you are doing. So for some Queen's policies, because we would be remiss if we did not discuss policy, of course, the highlight of every presentation about teaching and learning. So for folks that are in CUFA, so that is the Queen's University Faculty Association, there actually is a description of what should be in a teaching dossier. So these are folks that would be in or have affiliations with the School of Nursing or would be CUFA faculty. For the folks that are here at SEMO, so the folks that are in the Southeastern Academic Medical Organization, there is some guidance that I have obtained for this one. I went over and I asked Dr. Diane Lougheed for her view on this issue. I understand as the Vice Dean Clinical that her perspective matters a great deal in what counts. So the main takeaway that I got from a very detailed email that I got back on this one, highlighting the importance of the topic, is that they are required for reappointment and promotion. The main difference between a teaching dossier for clinical facing faculty and those that are more conventional undergraduate and graduate student facing is the source of the teaching evaluations. These are different for clinical facing. So the teaching evaluations you would be getting would be from, say, Elentra, the assessments of teaching that you are doing with the undergraduate or in residency, or they would be from one-on-one multi-source feedback or from other types of feedback that you would be providing that is documented within Elentra. Those are the kinds of things that you'd be looking for, obviously anonymized to remove the student's name, but those are the kinds of things that you would be chronicling as being the evaluation data showing I am an effective teacher. These are the kinds of appraisals that I've been receiving. You should probably also be using many of them rather than only using a few. If you're using only a few, it looks like cherry picking. If you're only going to show 3 teaching evaluations, I guarantee you almost anyone can produce a good 3. Try doing that with 10. Try doing that with 20. Naturally showing more evaluations and having that show your quality as an educator more broadly and over time is far more compelling than showing only a couple of them. Now, what should the format of a teaching dossier look like? Don't worry, we're going to get some examples in a second. I'm going to lay them all out, and my slides are going to be available for everyone to have. So as a general rule, the contents should be selective and coherent. What I mean by this is that it tells a story. It's not a CV that is organized by time, although you certainly can use time organizing elements in a teaching dossier. It should be outlining a coherent narrative of who you are as a teacher. In general, early career dossiers are somewhere between 6 and 12 pages, not including appendices. That's the kind of length of space that you have to make your case about yourself as a teacher, early career-wise anyway. If you are mid-career, it's not surprising if sometimes it's between 12 and 20 pages. These appendices, I'll talk to you about what those are a little bit later on, but for the most part, this is the list of your active teaching and past teaching. The 6 to 12 pages and the 12 to 20 pages, the conventional part of your dossier would be a list of your current academic position, the kinds of teaching that you are doing, the types of educational presentations that you may have done, the scope of the evaluations that you may have received so far. Naturally, these do accrue over time, much like a CV does, and they build up. Late career, it's not uncommon for a teaching dossier, because you've been at it for a while, to add up to be over 30 pages or so, including appendices. Mine currently, because I'm so education focused and not quite as much research, mine currently is hovering around the 30-page mark. That's just the scope of the amount of teaching that I happen to have done in my short career thus far. So the contents of a teaching dossier. The first thing that people should see after your name is your teaching philosophy. A teaching philosophy is 1 to 2 pages. If you are writing any longer than that, it ceases to be a teaching philosophy and it becomes a teaching litany or a teaching treatise, in which case I welcome you to publish it, but don't put it in your dossier. A teaching philosophy is relatively to the point. It outlines your beliefs and who you are as a teacher. It should describe your general approach to teaching and the rationale behind it. I will show you mine, and I will show you one, and I will show you another example in a bit. It should describe and contextualize your inspirations. What goes into your approach to teaching? Thing 2, listing and briefly describing your teaching commitments. These would include your clinical and non-clinical teaching and supervision, so in the undergraduate, postgraduate, graduate setting, your guest lectures at the undergraduate, postgraduate, and faculty development and CPD spots. People always forget about CPD and faculty development. That is teaching all the same. You should be listing these presentations, specifically because more often than not, they are invited presentations. Just like an invited lecture is much more prestigious than a conference presentation, this is the kind of thing you should be highlighting, that you have been invited to speak at a faculty development program or at a continuing professional development program. Third group, demonstrating your special contributions to teaching. For example, if you are a member of any curricular development and innovation committees, if you're a member of any educational leadership groups or demonstrations of your educational leadership, educational research projects that you happen to be doing. Dr. Maria Hussein catches my eye, having been present for the fact that she is doing several education research programs with the wider Office of Professional Development, as well as some stuff in simulation. You should all stay tuned for that. I'm sure it's going to be great. In terms of any educational awards that you would happen to be receiving or any mentoring you are doing in the form of structured mentorship programs or also informal mentoring that you are doing. I say this in a department of psychiatry. There's a lot of mentoring happening here. This is the kind of thing that you would want to be documenting. Don't let it go to waste. Evaluation data, obviously. So teaching data summaries from any of the courses that you happen to be teaching, if you are doing any at the undergraduate, at the MD program level, or any residency half days, these are the kinds of things that you would want to be including. They show your quality as an educator. I'll now move on to appendices. So official letters of thanks, acknowledgement, that kind of thing. You want to try and have that somewhere between the 1 to 5 item mark, somewhere around there. If you're having more than 5, pick the best 5. Recency does matter. Sample lectures, course syllabi, or course materials that you have developed on your own, but also co-developed. It's important to show that you can be an educator as part of a team. Cards, notes, or anecdotal feedback from students, you can include those. I would recommend that you redact the name unless they have actively waived anonymity. So evaluations from didactic rounds, so these would be things like grand rounds, conference presentations, that kind of thing. These are moments when you are teaching, and the feedback that you receive on these does matter. You would also be looking at things like thank you letters, congratulatory letters, emails, colleagues' letter of support. Those ones are optional, but I always find it very powerful when I'm looking at a dossier if I can get a peer reference. Somebody's like, this is what it's like working with Jen, or this is what it's like working with Terry. Award certificates or congratulatory letters. So before you laminate them, take a clean scan of them. Once you have laminated them, it's really shiny and it's very hard to document properly in a thing, and it makes it really hard to read. So do that before you laminate and post it up on the fridge. Don't double dip. If you have a congratulations letter and an award certificate from the same thing, I would recommend including the award certificate, not both. Yes, I'm very proud of you that you happen to have won that thing. Don't include both. Pick one. Educational publication samples. That front page of that article that you've published, if it's education related, absolutely within scope to show. Samples of teaching assignments that you've participated in or co-created. The assignment first page is often a pretty good way of showing what kind of teacher a person would happen to be. Now, as I mentioned before, I used to be a biology teacher, and I got sick and tired of lame biology assignments in my classroom. So I started creating more interesting ones. For example, the diversity of living things, which is one of those units in grade 11 and grade 12. I had my students design a zoo, and the animals had to be able to cohabitate together. It was a way of getting them to show how food chains actually worked. and that sort of thing. So putting the lions and the antelope in the same exhibit, probably a bad idea. And I would get people to explain that one out. But it was way easier than saying and getting them to explain keystone predators and trophic cascades and stuff like that. Don't be shy about showing the assignments you've given that have gotten students to think about doing things differently. Going along with that, samples of inspired student work. I would not be going for the average student's work here. I would be wanting to show somebody who went above and beyond, that you think there is a credible reason that it happened because of the assignment that you gave. Those are the kinds of things you would be wanting to include in the appendices. Lots and lots of ideas. Normally, if somebody's like, my teaching dossier is so short, that is my hypothetical person voice. It is not a commentary on any one person, but that is what I would imagine if somebody were to be asking about a teaching dossier. Why is it so short? Probably because you're underestimating the number of things that you could be including in there. Tons of things that you could be including. So tips for keeping and maintaining a dossier. Number one, starting out with 0 pages is the hardest part. But once you've actually built out a bit of a dossier, start early and save everything. Anything that you think could be relevant, pop it into an electronic folder that you happen to have. In my case, I actually have a Teams group that's me, myself, and I, that is all of the documents and things that I get that I think could be relevant for a dossier. And once a term, with a glass of red wine, I pop open that folder and I pick the best things and I include it in my dossier. I update it. By regularly doing it, it doesn't have to be quite as arduous of a process, and you can kind of steer the kinds of teaching assignments that you would be seeking out. It's a way of curating and filling it out so that you have no weaknesses in your teaching game, at least no perceivable ones in that way. Developing and revisiting a teaching philosophy. It's still 1 to 2 pages. Yes, you get more good ideas over time, but if you don't cut something to add something, you will end up with a teaching treatise, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I love a good teaching treatise. It's fantastic. I love reading it about what somebody happens to be thinking about teaching. That should be published in a commentary as opposed to being your teaching dossier, which should be 1 to 2 pages. Keep it lean, keep it mean. It should still state what your identity as a teacher is. And identity does change over time. I have become, if you believe it or not, I have become less quirky over time in my teaching style. I dare I say I have matured. I've had some very good mentors over time, that I'm no longer quite as bombastic as I used to be. I've calmed down. I don't know if Leslie's on the line, but she'll probably be laughing at that. How have you developed as a teacher so far? There's a linearity, there's a chronology in a good teaching dossier, especially a teaching philosophy, that shows your evolution over time. I'll show you mine, and you'll be able to tell it's from a couple years ago. Also, and this is incredibly self-serving, take advantage of professional development opportunities like those created by the Office of Professional Development and Educational Scholarship here at Queen's. I don't know why I'm going to say their email address, outside, but maybe it feels like it's useful. opdes@queensu.ca. Email them and ask them things. You'll probably end up speaking to me, and I'll connect you with whatever resource it is that might help you. So a teaching philosophy, in this case, I don't need you to read all of this one, but if you take a look at the first couple of lines and the last couple of paragraphs that are on there, you can kind of see what this person is trying to say. So number one, they start off with a quote. They went right for the top. They went for Nelson Mandela. Good for them. They've got a quote. Well done. They start off with a quote. That is what this person happens to believe. It talks about who they are and what they do, what kind of teaching methodologies they use. Now, I always like to show people the individual and small sections of the work that I'm producing here that were augmented by AI. So I will now show people what was AI. It'll be in highlights. AI is now capable of writing a teaching dossier. What I will point out is you will want to tell it things. You will want to use individual lines from it and paraphrase it to make it your own. When I read that dossier, It is a hodgepodge of ideas. There is not a linearity to it. This, I can tell, is not a human's dossier. This is what someone went and said, these are a bunch of things that happen to be important. I will write a teaching dossier for you about it. And dutifully, ChatGPT went and did its darndest to talk about adopting student-centered teaching methodologies, but also about creating a supportive and inclusive environment that values diversity and encourages the exchange of ideas. These ideas are laid out in a way that makes sense to the AI because it was trained by machine, and it looks for high impact, high frequency things. And it puts them all together saying, well, you know, if oranges and apples are both great, they clearly belong in the same pie. These related ideas do not have a unifying thread through them. Yours should. It should tell your story. Yes, individually, these are great ideas. These are the kinds of things you would want to comment on, but you have to make them your own to make it a compelling teaching philosophy. I'll show you mine from 9 years ago. 9 years ago with, and I can, or sorry, it was the first lines from 9 years ago. The rest of it has been modernized for now, for folks to be able to see. So that first line that I wrote, education's role in the world may once have been reproducing society and ensuring that generations are raised to fill the void left by others. However, education now has an opportunity to renew society. Timeless line. That's from John Dewey. John Dewey at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. The second sentence there with, as it turns out, society does need renewing after pandemics, political upheaval, and whatever other horrors 2024 decides to throw our way. That's me. This is communicating who I am as an educator. It's showing a little bit of my kind of like sardonic approach to looking over at things, overcoming adversity, working together. It communicates who I am. If you read what's on the label, you know what is in the can. That is what you want to do with your teaching dossier. It should be communicating who you are. Reading a good teaching philosophy is refreshing, especially if you know the person. And if you know the person and their teaching dossier doesn't match up, it is disconcerting. The later on sections of this are some highlights of things that I happen to believe in. So self-determination theory, evidence-based practices, cognitive sciences, and ethic of care. It's highlighting what my inspirations are and who I am as an educator. There are concepts and things that matter to you. Those should be in your teaching dossier. Last line is supposed to be the strongest line that you write. You should talk about who you are as an educator, and mine closes out with, my legacy shall be my students' ideas and actions. All of this, clear line at the beginning, all the way to the end. Now, this is what I would call a B+ teaching philosophy statement for me. Truthfully, because this is out of date and it's an anachronism. It doesn't really reflect all the growing that I've learned in terms of working together with others, in terms of melding together diverse different types of beliefs into creating the best possible product, because no one perspective can accomplish everything alone. It's missing pieces. So this is something I would have to modernize over time. But the point I wanted to make is, if you take a look at the first line and at the last line and the pieces in the middle, it adds up to a coherent narrative. It explains that I am less concerned with my achievements as a teacher, and I'll measure myself on the achievements of my students. Clear line of thinking, lines up with the types of inspirations that I'm using. I am being true to myself. This is a teaching philosophy of somebody being honest with themselves and telling who they are applying with what they should be expecting. You'll want to do something similar in yours. So now that you've put now that you have all the components, how do you put it together? So this is what a dossier can look like. This is a relatively black and white one. You will notice it has the name, the date that it is prepared. It gets into their teaching and their educational activities, and then it's organized. Undergraduate, postgraduate, graduate, continuing professional, and faculty development. There is a continuum here. It's not purely chronological in the order that a teaching event has happened, but it's organized into sections. First section is teaching and educational activity. Next could be something like curricular development and innovation, and it follows that same pathway over and over again. First undergraduate, then postgraduate, then graduate. Done right, it's an encyclopedia of your teaching, but more accurately, it's not really an encyclopedia. It's a museum. It's curated. It shows and displays specific artifacts from your teaching to create a coherent narrative. Then you might get into things like educational research, organizations you are a part of, conferences, workshops, any of the invited lectures. Although I personally would put invited lectures and presentations up towards the top. That's just me. They're more prestigious. You will want to include that. Mentoring and educational research, as well as awards with honors. All of these types of things matter. These are the kinds of things that you would want to be including. So this is an example of the data forms within a teaching dossier. You can see that a person has organized it. They've tried to create a sense of these are the teaching effectiveness scores that they happen to have. Now, this is an example from a little while ago. The teaching effectiveness scores at the undergraduate level have now become the QSET tool, so the Queen's student evaluations of teaching and others, but still clearly organized, showing the types of teaching that you are doing in a very compact form. This is something you could consider as an organizational tool in your dossier. So what does a fantastic dossier do? I know my audience. I don't believe anybody here is interested in doing a B+ dossier. I believe that everybody here is swinging for the A+, the A's, and are the chronic overachievers. Well done, you. A fantastic dossier makes a coherent argument. Starts with your teaching philosophy. It represents your teaching experiences. It's detectable in your curriculum reforms and designs. Is spoken to in evaluations. Your evaluations support your narrative. And it shows up in your professional development. You will use it over and over again. So some of the resources that Queens can use in order to help you. So number one, if you email fact.dev@queensu.ca, you will get in contact with my staff. And you say, I need a teaching consult. I need a teaching dossier consult. You'll be connected with me. And I will look over your teaching dossier and give you feedback. Every year, a couple people take me up on this one. And they're happy about it because I go and I tell them the truth about their dossier. I say, this is a section you could use to add something more to it. This is a section I would organize a little differently. Here are the types of things that, by the way, you were at that CPD program. I remember you being there. You should list this in your dossier. It's very hard to keep one up to date completely on your own. It's much easier if you have the support of somebody else who can help you look over it and give you an honest appraisal. I would say a peer in the same situation as you would be able to do the same thing. They would be able to help you by pointing out and saying, I think you have an opportunity to add here or here. There are some guides we can look at. I'm going to include Queens's 2 guides. So the teaching dossier guide, which is in the Faculty of Health Sciences, that third link here, and the Preparing a Teaching Dossier webinar, which we had a couple of years ago. And this one, I believe it was given by Dr. Claudiana Colomitra. I will also begrudgingly include U of T's Teaching Dossier Guide, which is another excellent guide. U of T advocates a more structured dossier approach than the Queen's Center for Teaching and Learning does here. It's effective. It's one that you can consider, depending on how structured you wish to be. So I'm going to open it up to questions in a second, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a couple of other faculty development activities that you could use to bolster up your teaching dossier. Because when Terry shows up, everybody gets served educational vegetables. So first one, there's a physician wellness speaker series that's happening. So the registration link is here. You can also scan this one on your phone. That QR code will link you up to the registration page. It'll be in the slides for you to see. This is one that shows a reflective educator, somebody who is willing to look and see for opportunities for growth in their practice. That's what I'm looking for when I look at a teaching dossier. Another one that you might consider, there's a feedback on feedback module that we put together. These ones all happen to be free. I'm not going to show up and sell anything during a talk because that kind of negates the point of doing disclosures of bias, I suppose. But these ones are all opportunities made by Queen's people for Queen's people. So this one here is you give it a piece of feedback that you gave, and it coaches you through a series of developments for actually refining that feedback and improving it. So that one was put together by Dr. Karen Schultz. The speaker series is organized actually by Dr. Flynn as well as CMO itself. And this one's incredibly self-serving because I'm the one organizing this one. This is the Essentials of the Health Sciences Learning Spaces. It is on April 23rd from 1 p.m. until 4:30. Registration for these ones are all free. There's a wonderful moment when you realize that you're in a place that values your development. Queen's does, clearly. The benefit of it is these things are created for you to be able to continue to develop as faculty development. So however scant you may believe your teaching dossier would be, if you make a point of attending 2 or 3 programs a year, before you know it, you will have a pretty full to bursting dossier. They're freely available. Really, there are no excuses other than are you available and do you have the time off or do you happen to be in clinic? So lots of opportunities there for filling out that dossier. I'll end my talk there and I'll open it up for questions. Should I end the screen share or what? Sure. Perfect. So any questions that folks might have, I'm happy to field them. Just let me know. Dr. Chu.
Thank you very much, Terry. It's really useful.
Okay, so we're going to be passing around a microphone so everybody can hear it. Yep.
Okay. Thanks very much for a really, useful talk.
Thank you.
The problem that I've had, and I don't know about other people, I've asked for the feedback after the lunch, and I'm told I'm not able to get it and can't have access to it because those students who might have fed back might still be here. So, who is it available to in that case, and how do I get any feedback on the feedback that I can't see?
I'm a little amused by that particular eccentricity. And one of the things that I've been speaking to the Elantra Consortium about it is, even if they can't share the feedback in its identifiable form, de-identified feedback is definitely better than no feedback at all. But the reasoning why they organize it in this way is until a student has graduated, it's actually a confidentiality and conflict of interest issue. Yes, darned inconvenient, as you articulate, that you wouldn't be able to access that feedback. That being said, anything on paper or asking for student testimonials after an interaction is entirely fair game. Ask them for a 2-sentence testimonial after a set of feedback talking about what this was like. I would recommend we're judicious in the students that we ask that particular testimonial from, but that's a way of getting that feedback in that meantime.
So the other question I have is, sometimes in teaching dossiers, people have put in all the presentations they've ever done. And that's not one of the things you've listed, like not the PowerPoints, every single one they've ever produced. Is that supposed to be in appendices or is that not?
I organized my teaching dossier in a way that when I was first starting out and I didn't have that many presentations, I would include them all. It would look scant if I were to start selecting and picking and choosing my favorites when I only had 4 or 5. Now that I've been at this for a little while and I've got 110 or so of them, that's too many to include. So I pick and I choose the ones that are the most relevant. I would also say that while there are the occasional presentations you might be getting, if they're more clinical and scientific in nature, they might be less valuable than a more educational talk might be in a teaching dossier. So naturally focusing on educational efforts and making sure that those are present is probably the most strategic thing you could do. It's difficult to speak in generalities about teaching dossiers because they are so personal. They vary so much based on a person's goals. In any case, one of the things that I've noticed is the majority of the consultation requests that I get tend to be from faculty in medicine as opposed to faculty in, say, psychiatry or oncology, or that I suspect it might be that they might be a little more aware of the services that are available for helping them with teaching dossiers. But I I am here to serve psychiatry as much as I'm here to serve cardiology, as much as I'm here to serve family medicine. So make use of the resources that are available. We're here for you. We just happen to be a little bit further away. Just note that we're not on main campus. Just in the same way that Providence. Sorry?
Where are you?
So we're actually the location of our office is on Berry Street by Princess. So we're actually across from the metro. So we're a little bit away. We affectionately refer to it as our corner of Siberia. I will say that we're available virtually, and that helps to close the gap quite a bit. We are closer to KGH and KHS or KGH and Hotel Dieu than we are to Providence Care. That being said, when the occasion calls for it and someone sends me a lovely email, I march on over to Providence Care, and I'm happy to give any talk you folks might need.
I have a question and a comment.
Of course.
Many thanks for this, because a lot of us start as faculty here, and this is something that's not given to us, on the table when we start working here. About the feedbacks, for the most part, they should be anonymized, isn't it, to be valid?
Yes, I would say so. There would be a certain coercive factor to listing off feedback that has a person's name directly on there, especially if that feedback were to be anything other than wholly positive. And even if it was wholly positive, you would have to think, to what extent is its positivity because they knew they were going to be named in a dossier on this one? Naturally, anonymized feedback is a lot easier to find believable than it would be otherwise, unless you can tell that the person has just made up a comment about themselves.
Yeah, quite often it could be a printout of an email or something. It
could be a printout of an email or that sort of thing. Obviously, these are things that increase its trustworthiness and validity. A person who is going to print off who's going to write nice sentences about themselves and include it in their dossier, that is the least of their problems in crafting a dossier. That there are more pressing things, like the fact that it won't fit with any of their teaching philosophies and will be painfully obvious to anybody who's assessing their dossier.
There's no real section here on what I could do better. Where does that stand in the dossier?
I would always have that in a teaching philosophy. I would also have that in the professional development section as a commentary about this is what I'm going to be looking at doing next. For example, in my teaching dossier, what I'm looking at doing next, I'm contemplating doing an MBA or something like that. I find that it's my business administration that continues to be a limited that happens to be a limitation for me. It's something that I could look at and grow from. It would be a nice addition. You can tell there's a degree of self-reflection that goes into a statement like that. For example, if someone here were to be looking at our Introduction to Health Professions Education certificate that we do, that might be something you might do, that you might write down and say, my next goal in professional development is attending this kind of certificate, or taking this course from Harvard Macy, or doing this at the University of Chicago, or taking this thing at Queens. You're looking for a degree of self-reflection there as well.
What do you say to a busy clinician who probably has less than 10% of the time for teaching in a busy clinical job? And there are many here.
I'm positive that there are. I will note that there are probably a few that weren't because they happen to be busy on this. The point that I would say on this is there is a decision that a person makes, regardless of how busy they are, to find one thing that they can work on at a given time, something that they are going to do to add in. And I think it's a sign of your commitment to teaching and being excellent. As much as they choose to focus on being excellent clinicians as well. But if you want to be an excellent teacher, simply put, you will have to schedule the time. This might take some planning. This might be something that you would have to make space for. But if you are serious about improving the quality of your teaching, and everyone's teaching can use improving in some space, it's something you would simply make the time for. I will point out the fact that it's accredited will be helpful. You can choose to spend the time in learning a little bit more about that latest drug, or something about the latest teaching style, and all the credits count the same. A credit in faculty development and a credit in CPD are the same. I would recommend a balanced diet of both. Thank you for asking a question that is incredibly self-serving for me. I thank you. Any others? Okay, any questions from folks? I can't make it pop up on my screen, but thanks, Deji. I mean, good to see you, but I could feel your presence. Very reassuring. Well, if there aren't any other questions, and understanding that there are quite a couple of busy folks in here as well, why don't I bring this on to a wrap and add 7 minutes back into everyone's day? You can take it off my tab. I'm sure I'm going to run long at some point on something else. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. It's a joy for the invitation.